This is Itchy and Scratchy. Ahem. They fight, they bite. They bite and fight and bite. Fight, fight, fight. Bite, bite, bite. The Itchy and Scratchy Show. This is the history of Itchy and Scratchy. Okay, heads up. This is going to be one of the weirder Simpsons histories. And that today we're looking at a cartoon within a cartoon. Not only do we have to get into Itchy and Scratchy's characterization stuff, and whether or not their portrayal changed over time, but there's also the history of the cartoon itself and the in-universe production side of things. The way these two interact does not necessarily line up with how they're used narratively on The Simpsons. So instead of going purely chronologically like we always do, we're going to cut up Itchy and Scratchy into distinct topical chunks. First, look at how each aspect evolved in seasons 1 through 8, then we'll compare it to the later stuff. Spoiler warning, in season 30, the mouse kills the cat. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Itchy and Scratchy's first appearance was in the Tracy Ullman short, The Bart Simpson Show. We see Scratchy chasing Itchy with an axe, then Itchy shows him a pinup calendar, shoves a stick of dynamite in his mouth, and Scratchy explodes. Pretty simple stuff, very tame by their standards. In the Tracy Ullman years, we get another fairly tame cartoon, as well as a background Christmas cameo. Their first appearance in the series proper, though, was in No Disgrace Like Home, as an untitled standalone cartoon. The opening theme song didn't show up until later in Krusty Gets Busted, the season finale. The biggest difference with these super early cartoons is in their portrayal of Scratchy as an aggressor. Itchy and Scratchy were partially inspired by classic cartoon dynamics like Tom and Jerry, where the cat obviously chases the mouse. The Simpsons staff also cites Herman and Catnip as their inspiration, a more obscure and more over-the-top cat and mouse duo. Early on, we'd see Scratchy chasing after Itchy, resulting in a violent comeuppance in the end. The lone exception being in this cartoon, in which Itchy instigates things. Itchy and Scratchy and Marge is where this dynamic really shifted, where Scratchy is presented as a victim of Itchy rather than an aggressor. This shift didn't happen overnight though, there is definitely a mix of both styles at play right here. The older dynamic of Itchy and Scratchy whacking each other with bats, or pointing increasingly larger guns at each other. But also stuff like blowing up Scratchy at a football game, or him answering the door and getting a bazooka in the face. The classic cat and mouse style does show up on The Simpsons from time to time. This didn't go away completely. Like in season 5, they literally had one where Scratchy finally does get Itchy. But by and large, Itchy is portrayed as the aggressor. Scratchy is just a normal dude trying to go about his daily life, getting some ice cream, celebrating his birthday, going with his friend Itchy to a restaurant. None of them go well for him. He's basically the feline Frank Grimes. Somewhat surprisingly, Itchy and Scratchy shorts weren't particularly bloody early on. They stick to exploding Scratchy's head most of the time, or the occasional bloodless stabbing. It wasn't until season 2's Oh Brother Where Art Thou, in which blood started showing up. Then, the floodgates were open, as well as Scratchy's arteries. Especially in seasons 5 and 6, showrunner David Merkin seemed to love ratcheting up the gore levels. This one from Deep Space Homer always comes to mind. And this one from Bart of Darkness. This cartoon is bloody bloody, I tell you. I didn't do a full tally of all of Scratchy's injuries and deaths, but you do start to see patterns after a while. The large majority fall into two categories. Cartoons where Scratchy gets blown up, and cartoons where Scratchy gets cut up. Early on they tended to favor explosions, but as the show became more comfortable with blood and gore, the knives started coming out. Decapitation especially being a very popular concept. Scratchy loses his head more often than Flanders in a Halloween episode. They also really love pulling on Scratchy's tongue to make bad things happen. And, on a more educational note, Scratchy has taught us that there are more than one way to skin a cat. Oof. I imagine a lot of kids didn't look at escalators the same way after this one. Early on, these cartoons tended to be standalone concepts, not really leaning into direct parodies. As the series became more referential, Itchy and Scratchy followed suit. They'll borrow a sequence from Field of Dreams and twist it into something horrifying. Incorporate an element from Alien right here. Straight up do scenes from JFK and Reservoir Dogs. Or they'll totally recreate classic Disney sequences. Thankfully, this never did become overbearing in this era, It didn't feel like Itchy and Scratchy just existed to be a parody machine for clever Simpsons writers. The majority of their appearances were originals. The writers did a good job making these big homages feel special, taking us through a history of animation through this ultra-violent lens. The first 8 seasons of The Simpsons were easily the golden era of Itchy and Scratchy. I know some people are like, well duh, it's also the golden age of The Simpsons, but these early years loved Itchy and Scratchy, kept finding reason after reason to insert the Simpson family into their world. Like there are just as many Itchy and Scratchy episodes as Sideshow Bob episodes in this era. The show would alternate back and forth between tackling the issues facing television today and satirizing the history of animation. Let's look at their history first. In Itchy and Scratchy the movie in Season 4, we get our first taste of their early years. They published their first short in 1928 with That Happy Cat and the more successful Steamboat Itchy. During World War II, they joined forces to decapitate Hitler, parodying similar wartime efforts. It's clear that Itchy and Scratchy aren't meant to be a specific homage to just one studio. They exist more as an amalgamation of animation history in general. That being said, they swung pretty hard toward Disney in Itchy and Scratchy Land in Season 6. Not just by parodying their theme parks and merchandising and stuff, we also see how they lionize their creator, Roger Myers Sr., while simultaneously suggesting he is a fairly shady individual. I've always been a huge fan of these Scratchtasia and Pinocchio sequences, not only because they are beautiful and awesome, that should speak for itself, but because they essentially fill in entire gaps into their history, where you immediately realize, okay, they made a bunch of features back then, just like Disney. Itchy and Scratchy did dip their toes in the worlds of Garfield, though, with their failed Itchy and Scratchy and Friends hour, which personally, I think got a bad rap. Disgruntled Goat is the man. They've done a great job so far laying the foundation of the early years of Itchy and Scratchy, hinting that Roger Myers Sr. is not a great guy. So here comes the day the violence died, in Season 7. This was a great opportunity to satirize one of the great controversies in animation history. Suggest that maybe Itchy and Scratchy's first short debuted in 1919 instead of 1928. In addition, we filled in another historical gap and got a glimpse of what, and who, Itchy and Scratchy were doing in the 1970s. That reminds me though, it's easy to forget sometimes about Itchy and Scratchy's history in the context of the Simpsons timeline, because they're such a Bart and Lisa-centric component. But they were around for so long that characters like Homer and even Grandpa would have been their fans over the years. We do get small glimpses of this dynamic in random episodes. In Season 13, Bart and Grandpa enjoy an old radio play of Itchy and Scratchy from back in the day. Grandpa reveals that Eleanor Roosevelt played Scratchy during the war. In a Season 24 flashback episode, Little Homer is wearing an Itchy and Scratchy shirt. Like I said, this is super understated in the show, this connection between Homer and these cartoons. It's just kind of weird that Bart and Lisa watches the exact same show that Homer did when he was little. Wait a minute. Maybe it's not so weird after all. In addition to all that historical stuff, the writers loved using Itchy and Scratchy to satirize issues facing the industry today. Or back in the 90s. Itchy and Scratchy and Marge started out by looking at the core concept of the show, have a debate about how cartoon violence affects children. They introduce Roger Myers Jr., and we get a basic sense of the production side of things. We get their biggest transformation ever in Simpsons history with Porch Pals, the most nauseatingly sweet thing ever conceived by man. Curse you, Snuh. Then in Season 4's The Front, we take an even closer look at the writing process of Itchy and Scratchy. It's a shift from the more issue-centric approach of Season 2. The violent stuff gets brought up a little here, but Itchy and Scratchy is primarily being used to tell a story about how the writers are treated in Hollywood. This modern commentary reached its climax in The Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show in Season 8. Now, Itchy and Scratchy serves as a vehicle for meta-commentary about The Simpsons itself, the dangers of executive meddling, and the perceived decline of a long-running series. We meet June Bellamy, the voice actor of Itchy and Scratchy, and of course, Poochie the Rockin' Dog. Poochie may have died on the way back to his home planet, but it was certainly not the last time we ever saw of him. Poochie did show up on occasion in future Itchy and Scratchy shorts. Milhouse even wears a Poochie shirt to a convention, which is a total Milhouse thing to do. In a lot of ways, the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show feels like the series finale for Itchy and Scratchy, or at least the end of an era. The show had put a lot of work into them in the first 8 seasons. After basically calling out the hardcore fans using Itchy and Scratchy, what else is there really to do at this point? Well, they hadn't been featured in a Treehouse of Horror segment, nor had they met the Simpson family, so they were able to knock out that in Season 10. This is a really fun Halloween segment overall. I love how Itchy and Scratchy are appalled by Lisa and Bart laughing at them. That's mean. But other than that, Seasons 9 through 12, the Mike Scully era, didn't really have much use for Itchy and Scratchy. They used to get about 4 or 5 yearly appearances, in addition to spotlight episodes. Here, we get 1 in Season 9, 1 in Season 10, 1 in Season 11, and 2 in Season 12. I'm guessing this was partially due to the Poochie episode, that maybe the writers felt they pushed the concept far enough and needed a break. That's fair. But this was also an era that wasn't shy about cartoony violence trickling into the world of Springfield. Maybe they just didn't need Itchy and Scratchy. The more often we see Homer's blood, the less we need to see Scratchy's. Season 12 does reveal that in the 1950s, Itchy and Scratchy did a commercial for cigarettes, much like the Flintstones used to do. And we got to see Itchy and Scratchy making out on the beach, if you're into that. So thanks, Season 12. When Al Jean took over as showrunner the following year, we started seeing Itchy and Scratchy more regularly again. It never reached the peak of the early years, but we would typically get them more than once per season. By and large, their core dynamic did not change very much. We still got to see Itchy torture Scratchy in strange and interesting ways. To the surprise of no one, Itchy did not suddenly grow a conscience in the later years. Unfortunately, we did not start getting new Itchy and Scratchy driven episodes during this middle era. That ship had kinda sailed. We had to wait until Season 30's Bart vs. Itchy and Scratchy for another one. Krusty reveals they're doing an all-female reboot of Itchy and Scratchy, which all the other boys hate, but Bart secretly enjoys. I wonder what this is a parody of. By the way, people were asking me to take a look at this episode, but no review. I refuse. Seriously though, Itchy and Scratchy are basically the same as usual right here, just doing a violent Pitch Perfect parody instead. Hey, she's getting a pretty good sound out of that girl. They were clearly still being used for meta-commentary about the entertainment industry. The difference was in how these later seasons handle Krusty's relationship with them. In Season 2, Roger Myers seemed to have the upper hand over Krusty. Look at the way he sort of cowers nervously. When Krusty runs into competition from Gabbo, Itchy and Scratchy immediately abandons him. By Season 8, things start shifting, where Krusty is calling them out for poor ratings and has creative input on how to fix the show. In the later years, Krusty's show and Itchy and Scratchy are basically the same production company. When Krusty loses funding, he has to do all the voice acting. Krusty is shown as an executive producer for Itchy and Scratchy. In this Season 30 Spotlight episode, the climax hinges on these vigilantes threatening to destroy the only copies of Itchy and Scratchy cartoons. Copies that Krusty has, and not Itchy and Scratchy Studios. I'm guessing this shift happened due to the death of Alex Rocco in 2015, who provided the voice for Roger Myers Jr. It made some sense to retire the character and shift the show business angle toward Krusty. The biggest changes to Itchy and Scratchy themselves were more stylistic, specifically in how much they spoke in their cartoons. Now, there were always instances of these two having dialogue during their shorts. Even as far back as Season 2, we got to hear their voices. Curse you, Snuh. However, this was still fairly uncommon. Itchy and Scratchy followed the more classic dynamic, where everything is conveyed through either pantomime or text. After Poochie showed up, June Bellamy started getting a lot more work on the show. Seasons 9 through 17 in particular were full of Itchy and Scratchy dialogue. They speak in about 50% of their appearances during this era. After Season 17 though, they tended to go back to the more classic way of conveying everything visually. I don't know if the writers got sick of it or what. Maybe Matt Selman complained, who knows. The nitpicky side of me definitely wants to criticize this shift. Like, there are certainly some cartoons here that didn't need dialogue in them. Come on, guys. However, I think this was necessary in order to keep Itchy and Scratchy fresh. There are only so many ways that you can explode Scratchy's head. Adding a bit of dialogue gives the writers access to jokes they wouldn't be able to deliver otherwise. I don't know if this joke about Richie Valens, Buddy Holly, and the Big Bopper really plays if Scratchy can't audibly recognize them. In addition, this era was excellent about playing around with their format, giving Itchy and Scratchy new things to do. There's that radio play I mentioned earlier. Itchy and Scratchy also recorded DVD commentary, describing the late hours and calling out Steven Soderbergh for making them do so many takes. Mr. Burns takes over the studio and makes them record a propaganda cartoon, all culminating in their Season 17 triumph, Stab-A-Lot, the Itchy and Scratchy musical. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Season 17 at all, but dang it, do I love this musical they put together. It's a really, really on-the-nose parody of the Lion King Broadway show, but the adaptation to Itchy and Scratchy is excellent. The costumes, the streamers of blood, the way they incorporate their classic theme. It even has this hilariously melodramatic and navel-gazing ballad, where Itchy and Scratchy ponder why they do the things they do. It turns out Scratchy is addicted to the pain that Itchy inflicts. It's so offbeat and needlessly introspective, I could totally imagine Broadway making them into a show like this. The other significant changes stylistically to Itchy and Scratchy were in how they went about their parodies and references. Direct parodies became slightly more elaborate during these later years. Yeah, we'd get JFK and Reservoir Dogs back in the day, but they tended to be just one short little sequence. The later years, especially post-season 20, followed more in the footsteps of Scratchtasia, mirroring the details of the source material more closely. For example, they did elaborate parodies of both Ratatouille and Up. With Ratatouille, the concept of the film lends itself perfectly to an Itchy and Scratchy short. The Up sequence is absolutely gorgeously put together, a near-perfect recreation of that marriage sequence from the film. In addition, they did parodies of Kung Fu revenge films, complete with a training montage. We get a House MD parody, with Itchy racking his brain to come up with a correct diagnosis. They hit up Downton Abbey, a chilling and totally serious commentary about the aristocracy. We get a triple feature of The King's Speech, The Social Network, and Black Swan. They did a fascinating parody of an experimental film I have never seen. Also, this is a thing that happened. Boy, I bet the Simpsons writers must have been high when they came up with this concept. See, I can make lazy jokes too. Say what you want about the extended parodies in the later years, like they don't all reach the heights of Scratchtasia, obviously. I look forward to their Parasite homage next year. But they gotta do something to keep Itchy and Scratchy fresh. We're basically gonna lose these characters if they can't think of new spins on them, keep trying them in different formats. It's nice seeing them show up in a couch gag, giving Scratchy a taste of life with the Simpsons. Turns out Scratchy wore out his welcome just as quickly as Otto did. Overall, I like how versatile Itchy and Scratchy are for The Simpsons. If you need them for a Butterfingers commercial or a video game level, they're happy to oblige. They even got the honor of being the opener for the Simpsons movie. That's prime real estate. Honestly, there are a lot of Simpsons episodes that open with an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon. They're such a good tool for starting or transitioning to a new scene, that if the writers need to get the characters in front of the TV, they can just cut to an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon. And the cartoons themselves are such a nice change of pace for the typical sitcom stories The Simpsons tell. Itchy is always coming up with newer and crueler surprises for Scratchy. It's not complicated for him, it's just what he loves doing. And Scratchy, for his part, tirelessly plays the fool for us. Most of these cartoons hinge on Scratchy's big reaction. Like, Itchy is the ideas guy, and you definitely need that, but Scratchy sells all these jokes exceptionally well. It's not enough to merely explode Scratchy's head, you need that reaction, that shocking anime betrayal. Basically, Scratchy is more important than Itchy, but don't tell Itchy I said that. Itchy's a jerk. As per usual, let me know in the comments who you would like to see for the next Simpsons Histories. Maybe not someone quite as bloody or violent as these two. Those YouTube algorithms are squeamish about that stuff. Also, let me know what your favorite Itchy and Scratchy moments are, and your favorite Scratchy deaths. Could it be that skin-shredding escalator? Or perhaps when he and his son were fed into a thresher. Maybe when he was digested in a cow's stomach. How about that time that Itchy used Scratchy as meat? Personally, I vote for Scratchy's head exploding in space. That's always a good one. The preceding video contains scenes of extreme violence and should not have been viewed by young children.